Welcome, everyone, to the Universal Peace Federation. My name is Ray Lapaukin, and the Universal Peace Federation is a global network of individuals building a world of peace in which everyone can live in freedom, harmony, cooperation, and prosperity. And our program today is part 3 of a series that we've been watching, and it's titled The Weight of Words, the Media's Role in Religious Freedom. And this is a very wonderful presentation that was given by Mrs. Nancy Jubb, who's the Communications Director for the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. And she'll be speaking on religious freedom. So please enjoy this.
Next guest to thank for the title of our program today. So Miss Nancy Jubb is the Communications Director for the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification USA. Prior to this, she worked for the U.S. Department of State at the the American Embassy in London, where she was awarded for her pioneering work in social media communication. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism and media from the University of London, Birkbeck College, and is currently dabbling in a master's in divinity, wow, at the Unification Theological Seminary. She also serves on the board of directors for 2 national nonprofit organizations, the Religion Communicators Council and the Women's Federation for World Peace, USA. She is also a proud wife of 18 years and the mother of 4 dynamic daughters. Miss Jubb, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that that wonderful introduction. I'm so honored to be part of this webinar. I feel like I've already gained a lot just by listening to Mr. Ross and Professor Campbell. So many great points, and so many great points that I also experienced as well, doing this role of communications director for Family Federation for World Peace and Unification USA over the last, I don't know, seven years now. So I would like to share my presentation with you all. So my presentation today is called The Pen, Sword or Shield, Ethical Considerations in Language Used by Media Professionals from the Lens of Cognitive Behavior. I think that, sorry, let me just pull up my notes. It was really interesting to hear Mr. Ross talk about what the day-to-day realities of journalists on the ground is like. And I think that in today's society, where we're so polarized across so many different lines of identity, that it's really easy to kind of look, especially from a religious organization's perspective, it's really easy to kind of vilify the media. Oh, the media is out to get us. They're evil. But the truth is that most people get into journalism because there is this call to a noble profession. A lot of journalists they really respect and identify with this idea of the press being the fourth estate, a body that can hold power to account and be a voice for the voiceless. And so rather than looking at them as like an enemy, I think it's really important for us to actually figure out how can we work together based on our shared connection of humanity. And I think the cognitive sciences are a great way to look at how we might overcome our differences and come together a little bit better. So anybody who knows me knows that I am a huge Brene Brown fan. I love everything and anything that she does, but I think it really speaks to why language is so important. In her latest book, Atlas of the Heart, she talks about language matters. It's the raw material of story. It changes how we feel about ourselves and others, and it's a portal to connection. With the same amount of power, language can also be used to strip people of their dignity and humanity. And with awareness about how dehumanization works comes the responsibility to call out dangerous language when we see it. I think this is powerful on many different levels, not just looking at the media, but also it really applies to our personal lives as well. But I won't jump into that too much. So in her latest book, actually, she talks a lot about the language around the emotion and the science around the emotion of contempt, disgust, and dehumanization. I'd like to read an excerpt just to kind of highlight why it's so relevant to media coverage. Dehumanization is a process. I think Michelle Mays, a professor in the philosophy department at Emmanuel College, lays it out in a way that makes sense. So I'll use some of her work here to walk us through it. Mays defines dehumanization as the psychological process of demonizing the enemy, making them seem less than human and hence not worthy of humane treatment. Dehumanization often starts with creating an enemy image. As we take sides, lose trust, and get angrier and angrier, we not only solidify an idea of our enemy, but we also start to lose our ability to listen, communicate, and practice even a modicum of empathy. Once we see people on the other side of a conflict as morally inferior and even dangerous, the conflict starts being framed as good versus evil. Mays writes, once the parties have framed the conflict in this way, their positions become more rigid. In some cases, zero-sum thinking develops as parties come to believe that they must either secure their own victory or face defeat. New goals to punish or destroy the opponent arise, and in some cases, more militant leadership comes into power. And another short excerpt, successful dehumanizing, however, creates moral exclusion. Groups targeted based on their identity, gender, ideology, skin color, ethnicity, religion, age are depicted as less than or criminal or even evil. The targeted group eventually falls out of the scope of who is naturally protected by our moral code. This is moral exclusion and dehumanization at its core. So, the word that I have up here on the slide, I think a lot of people have a very people from minority religious groups may have a very visceral reaction to this word, who feel that they've been misrepresented. And other people might look at this word and think, so what? We say the cult of Lululemon or the cult of Apple, but actually the word itself bears such weight. When we take into consideration the title of this whole webinar, the weight of words, actually, the word cult was created with the intent of othering, of separating groups and kind of deeming them outside of society. And with this word, even in the most innocuous context of like the cult of Apple or the cult of Lululemon, even that denotes this kind of moral superiority that, well, I'm not stupid enough to follow them, or, and that's dangerous because that is where contempt starts to breed. And from contempt, it's a slippery slope right into dehumanization. We study history, we look at the Holocaust, we look at genocide, we look at all of these atrocities that humanity can perpetuate, and we wonder, how do we get there, right? Well, it starts from emotions of contempt, of disgust, of moral superiority. And that's why it's so important for us even personally, to really examine ourselves and to ask ourselves, where I might have these feelings of bias towards other people. Contempt is such a powerful emotion that even the Gottman Institute, which study marriages, they can predict with over 90% accuracy who will get a divorce simply based on whether or not there is contempt in the language that's used when spoken to their spouse. It's very fascinating. Yeah, and so then, even from here, from words like this, you get terms like Mooney or, The word Mormon is often used in a derogatory context as well. You know, it's a way of creating labels. And I think the media really needs to think about, or at least consider, the implications of the words that they create. You know, at the most basic level, you can treat somebody with respect by calling an organization their actual official name. You know, like, let's start there from the most basic level of respect. I think it's really telling also about right now. There is a lot of negative media surrounding, you know, the Unification Church, as we're commonly referred to, in Japan, and particularly because of what happened with former Prime Minister Abe's assassination, that he was targeted because he was supposedly connected to our church, and because of that, he lost his life. And yet the media is taking this as an opportunity to really create a lot of negative bias. There aren't, I don't see a lot of articles or journalists consulting with religion scholars, with people who study, you know, organizations and can speak in a more unbiased manner. And so when you look at what's happening now because of that, and this is a modern day democracy, I think that's pretty alarming, that suddenly you have legislation being pushed through that's being punitive, aimed specifically at us, and yet not considering the greater implications on other religious bodies as well. So, for example, just in December, they passed legislation to say that it is now considered child abuse to say that your child, for a parent to tell their child that they might go to hell, is now considered child abuse, broadly speaking. And that kind of legislation it was aimed at our organization, but the Financial Times did a great article actually unpacking this a little bit. Have they thought through the implications? The fact that this type of legislation could also be used against practicing Buddhists or practicing Shintoists. You know, rushing through this kind of thing is exactly what Brene unpacks in her research on not her research, but in referencing the research on dehumanization and where this could possibly lead to. Just another example is, so a few years back when my oldest was in first grade, I believe it was right around the time of the elections, and you know, right before Trump was elected president, and we live in a very, very blue area. And she came home saying that the kids, you know, as a kindergartner, she came home saying, oh yeah, the kids in my class were talking about that we should kill Trump. And I was horrified. I mean, absolutely horrified that kids, the 6-year-old kids, are talking about using that kind of language because of what they were hearing from their parents. And despite the fact that I myself am a Democrat, I hope that doesn't change your view of me too much. And I don't align with Trump necessarily, but I had to sit her down and have a real talk about, you know, it is first of all, talking about killing people is not okay. But second of all, it's really unfair to the people who do believe in the things that he talks about. And you have to learn to take a perspective that's going to understand why other people believe something that you might not believe. And we have to learn to engage with those people and talk about those things and think about those things rather than just condemning somebody because they believe something different from us. Yes. So I'd like to propose this model that I learned about on Krista Tippett's On Being podcast, which if you love spirituality of any kind, I highly recommend it. I get so much life out of listening to her interviews. But she interviewed Trabian Shorters, who He is a global authority on asset framing, which uses cognitive science to multiply the reach, appeal, and outcomes of social impact and equity initiatives. His area is particularly focused at ethnic minority representation, but I think it has broader implications for religious representation as well. So asset framing is a process of defining communities by their aspirations and contributions rather than their challenges and deficits. And this quote from him, "The fact of the matter is we all want the same things, and deficit narratives and stigmatization are what's preventing us from seeing each other as assets." I have some great quotes from him, but I'll save that for another time. I would say that, this approach of asset framing, actually, it really is an example of conflict resolution at its on a larger scale. But even on a personal level, you're not going to win an argument with somebody by condemning them, are you? You have to acknowledge some of the positives that the other person coming to the table brings. You have to try to connect on your shared points of things that you have in common in order to open the dialogue and to resolve conflict. And he talks about this also from the perspective of, the way that we talk about and represent. For him, it's representation of the Black community, but really it could be applied more widely. I'd even say that this is it's a great example of, interfaith interactions. I think joining the Religion Communicators Council has also given me so much life, because talking to other people about their faith and learning and understanding from that, it really enhances an appreciation of my own faith as well. It deepens my faith. I think it helps me to be a better practitioner of unificationism by understanding other people's faiths as well. I think Professor Campbell touched on it by talking about holy envy. I love that expression, like really admiring the beautiful qualities of somebody else's faith makes me feel more deeply connected, and that I'm practicing my own faith more deeply as well by respecting that. So some of the organizations, so Mr. Shorters also works with Solution Journalism Network, which looks at reframing news articles rather than from only approaching things from a deficit perspective. A lot of newsroom editors will kind of use the most salacious headlines in order to kind of capture eyeballs, right? But even Psychology Today magazine reported recently that people are suffering from something close to trauma from overexposure to negative news. And so journalists really, I think it's our responsibility in the media to really take a look at what is the impact of how we're writing on society at large. And the Solutions Journalism Network is trying to teach journalists a new way of framing narratives by first tackling what are the contributions of these minority groups and framing it as an asset, and then going into the areas where they're underserved or the negative points that still need to be addressed. And of course, there's also organizations. I mean, I think Professor Campbell's presentation is more comprehensive in the organizations that we can work with, but I really recommend to people who don't necessarily work with the media or aren't directly engaged in them, please support these organizations that do work with journalists and media. Make a small donation, or contact them, ask them how you can support, maybe volunteer your time if you can, because they're doing great work, like the Religion News Association, Religion Communicators Council. They are really actively trying to engage the media in a way to bring the positives of religion and religious representation to the public. And I just want to close on this short clip from that specific interview with Krista Tippett and Travian Shorters. I think it's rather than kind of rereading the words, I'd love for you guys to hear the conversation because it was just so inspiring to me. So I'll just play this little clip for you. Oh, sorry. Actually, let me share my sound. There we go.
I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. Today, I'm with Travian Shorters, a visionary social entrepreneur and the creator of Asset Framing. I know you're doing some work with the Solutions Journalism Project and perhaps
Yes.
with other journalists. And journalists are often also very, very mission-driven people.
No doubt.
But the forms that have us investigate dysfunction
Yes.
and focus just with such intensity on what is catastrophic and corrupt and failing seem at this stage, you can look at history and you can see where that led to things being made better. But right now, as you said, there's all this reasonable despair and
Yes.
fear, and that is deepening it. And something that I can't remember if you wrote this somewhere or said it, but as I was investigating you said we crave the moral, and you're just really talking about at that nervous system brain level, we crave the moral direction stories provide. And I think that is such an interesting way to underscore what is at stake and kind of a calling to the parts of our society that help us piece our story together.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I use Black racial experience as kind of a divining rod for these conversations,
Yeah.
in part because that's where America, we stumble all, whatever we say we believe, you throw Black racial considerations and all of a sudden we go sideways, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point about the role that media plays, I've said this to David Bornstein, who is the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network, that if there is a sort of narrative of racial hatred in the United States, then the news media is co-author of that narrative and co-conspirator in the cover-up. It's very easy to understand from a sociological standpoint that when the media reports on populations in cities and neighborhoods a very specific and particular way and never counterbalances that narrative with any positives, then the only patterns that our brain have to draw upon are fear triggers.
I think this was from something that Solutions Journalism had. Anyway, it's like this is the original lead of a story, right? For
Yes.
example.
Yes.
And it's just so familiar. Right? The Latinx community in the United States has always been, for the most part, on the bottom half on income in the American society. The struggle to have access to health and mental care is part of the history. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has come to intensify the problems. And that's how it starts. It goes on.
Yep.
And that's a very familiar way into story. And then here's a revised lead that I think your team took a look at. And it starts this way. So since 2014, Latinx people have constituted the largest ethnic group in the nation's largest state. They now represent 39% of the California population. And then it goes on to talk about in recent years, Latinx residents have made advances in economic well-being, measured by metrics like reduced poverty rates, growth in business ownership. And then after a couple of sentences like that, people elected school boards, local offices.
Yeah, they've made progress in everything
Has
except
increased
for
significantly.
this.
And then, despite this impressive social and economic progress, Latinx residents have lagged behind other Californians in achieving important goals like home ownership and income growth. And we can now add to that list the disproportionate harm visited on the community by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, with that example, that was a California Health Care Foundation, I believe.
Oh, yeah, right. But you've worked with them.
We were trained and consulted, and then they
learned
applied
to do
it.
this. Yeah.
They applied it. Yeah. And what I want to underscore in those two different ways of framing, all the facts were accurate. Nobody made anything up.
Yeah.
Both framings are true, right? So we didn't have to invent anything. The first framing, however, about how Latin American folks always failed in these ways, that framing totally left out all the assets, all the aspirations, all the kind. It characterized them literally without value. The asset frame version started with their value, yet still told you about all the ways that they're not, where they want to be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why we suggest to journalists it is more accurate and honest reporting. When you're going to tell the story where all you do is point out what's broken, but you don't point out what's working in a culture, well, recognize you're inclining people to think that all that exists about that culture is brokenness.
Yeah.
They didn't come up with that conclusion on their own. They came up with that conclusion by your reporting. And so that's what I mean by journalism ends up being a co-author.
Yes. So, yeah, amazing podcast interview. Yeah, I think asset framing maybe is an approach that we could explore in the media as a new way to engage society in conversations about representation. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. And if you'd like to continue the discussion more, please get in touch with us. Our information has been shown up on the screen. In the Universal Peace Federation, we're working with many different aspects of society, parliamentarians, academicians, arts and culture, the religious spiritual community, and this program specifically was more addressed to the media and journalism. And at the Universal Peace Federation, we have some core values that I'd like to read for you. Number one is God. We are one human family created by God, our heavenly parent. Number two is spirituality. The highest qualities of the human being are spiritual and moral in nature. Three is family. The family is the school of love and peace. Number four is service. Living for the sake of others is the model for a peaceful society. And number five is unity. Peace comes through cooperation beyond the boundaries of ethnicity, religion, and nationality. So if those thoughts resonate, you please get in touch with us. Our theme, also our mantra is interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. And that's what we're trying to promote through these webinars and through our various associations. And I'd like to conclude by offering a complimentary biography from our co-founders at the Universal Peace Federation, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. So please get in touch with us. Our contact information will be coming up again, and we can get that out to you. So thanks for joining us today.